Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about some parallel algorithms for Tensor-Train Format. And you can see from my title that there will be going to be three things I need to explain before I actually get started. The first is what are tensors and why we care about them. Second will be like what are Tensor-Train formats and why do we want to use them. And the third is what kind of parallel algorithm that I'm going to use like for this specific tensor format. So to get started, I'll start with what are tensors, and hopefully this will be also very convenient for the rest of the speakers in my session because I see a lot of tensors in the titles. So tensors are high-dimensional data structures, or you can think about them as like high-order analogs of matrices. So a scalar, you can think about it as a zero-dimension tensor, vector as dimension 1, matrix dimension 2, and anything that's higher order than 3 will be like tensors. We can call them tensors. So a third-order tensor will have a cube-like shape. Why do we want to store things in a tensor is that I believe tensor can actually reveal data correlation in the data set. So for example, here we have a video. Let's say we have this like discretized video, and we can store this video in a 4D tensor. We need 2 dimensions for the frames. We need 1 dimension, that's the third dimension for the number of frames, which basically means time in the video. And we also have the 4th dimension for the RGB colors. So if we store a video in a 4D tensor, then we can see that pixels that are next to each other will appear next to each other in the data structure. Pixel like evolving along time will also be next to each other in the 3rd dimension in the tensor, and so on and so forth. So when we analyze data in this format, it's actually better than analyzing like a huge long vector. So we can find some correlation in this data format. There is one actual caveat about using tensors is that if you want to store every element of the tensor, then there will be something called the curse of dimensionality. Namely, if we have a d-dimensional tensor and the mole size is n, that means the size for each dimension is n, then if we want to store every element, then that needs n to the dth power degrees of freedom, and this will easily like break your memory on your local machine because eventually when d gets large, maybe 10, and n is 10, then it's taking a lot of space on the computer to store that. So instead, we want to use some type of data sparse tensor formats for efficiency in terms of storage. In this talk, I'm going to basically talk about the Tensor-Train Format, which is also known as matrix product state in quantum physics. And like in a simple way speaking, that the Tensor-Train Format is trying to store every element of the tensor as the product of a sequence of matrices. And these matrices look like trains, so they are called tensor train. So these G1, G2, and G3 here, they are actually 3D tensors. So when you fix the index of a tensor element, you just like get the matrices. You take one slice from the tensor, you get a matrix, and eventually this will be the product of 3 matrices for a 3D tensor. So the storage of the tensor is linear with respect to the S that we find, which we will call the tensor train size or tensor train core size, and also linear in the mole size n. So basically this means linear in dimension and linear in mole size, which is significantly better than n to the 3rd power if we find S1, S2 to be small. However, the existing algorithms that we have to calculate the tensor train format of a given tensor, namely tensor train single value decomposition, tensor train stretching, TT cross, all these algorithms require elements of the entire tensor for you to actually compute the tensor train format. So this leaves us wondering if we want to like execute our algorithm on a multi-process machine, then can we distribute the elements or distribute the tensor into different processes, and we can still have a distributed parallel algorithm to compute the tensor train decomposition. So our target will be twofold. The first is that we want memory efficiency of a tensor from the tensor-train format. We also want computational efficiency by using like distributed parallel algorithms to help us speed up things and then actually like have a great computation power. So what we designed is a distributed memory framework called called subtensor parallelism. It is actually a type of data parallelism. It's just you have entire data, a tensor, you just distribute the tensor elements into different processes, and you carry on any tensor train decomposition algorithm you like on the subtensors, and then eventually you gather the information and get the tensor train format you want. So on the left, you can see there's one way that we can partition the tensor, 3D tensor, partition them into like several pieces. And the way that we have this regular partitioning is that it's easier for us to do communication analysis with this type of process grids. So I'm going to talk about two algorithms, briefly talk about two algorithms that can fit into this distributed parallel layout. The first is called the subtensor tensor train stretching, which draws from the randomized matrix finder is a type of like matrix approximation algorithm, randomized to calculate a matrix decomposition. So, namely speaking, we have the picture on the left. We have the matrix that we want to compress. Then we just like use matrix multiplications and QR decompositions to find a projection matrix Q, so that we can build our matrix approximation. Originally for the entire tensor, if we want to build the tensor train format for the entire tensor, we need to run this algorithm on each unfolding for each dimension of the tensor. So for a d-dimensional tensor, there will be d-1 runs of this algorithm. But with distributed matrix vector multiplication and distributed QR decomposition, we can distribute this word to different processes and ask each process to do it on one single subtensor, and then at the end of the algorithm, we just gather the information back and then get the final format of the global tensor. Here is some results. So I'm showing strong scaling results, both in terms of storage, which on the left, and time, it's on the right, of two of our stretching algorithms, PSTT2 and PSTT2 one-pass, and compare it with the serial counterpart, SSTT. So you can see either for storage or for time, one version of our algorithm will beat the serial version, and they all scale pretty well with respect to the number of processes that we use. The second algorithm is subtensor TT cross, which is built on the matrix CUR decomposition. So in this decomposition for a matrix, we have the matrix A, and we actually want to build the low-rank decomposition such that we draw directly from the matrix A of its columns and rows. So the C matrix is built of columns of A, and R is built of rows of A. And we have connecting matrix U in between. So the key kernel of this algorithm is that we need to select the best element, we call it pivot, of the matrix A, and then we will use this pivot and find its corresponding rows and columns and put them into C and R. So also, like TT stretching, for the original tensor, if we want to run TT cross, then we need it for every unfolding of every dimension. And since all we want to find is pivots, so we can just find pivots on each subtensor and then gather them back into when we hit the final stage of our algorithm, and then find the TT format. So I'm going to talk about some future directions. So, I introduced two algorithms for parallel distributed memory TT decomposition. And so this leaves us wondering, can we extend to more algorithms in terms of the TT decomposition? And also, what about some other tensor formats people like to use, like Tutor or CP? And how to relate with existing packages and applications. Thank you.